Welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me today for another verse of the day. Today we are going to sit with one of the most powerful and most quoted verses in all of the New Testament, John chapter 13, verse 34, and in the New International Version it reads like this. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Just a short sentence, only a handful of words, and yet inside those words is one of the deepest, most life-changing instructions that Jesus ever gave to his followers. So today we are going to slow down, we are going to unpack this verse piece by piece, we are going to look at the setting in which Jesus spoke these words, we are going to look at what it meant to the people who first heard it, and most importantly, we are going to look at what it means for you and me right now, in our homes, in our workplaces, in our friendships, and in our churches. So grab your Bible, grab a notebook if you like to write things down, get comfortable, and let us walk through this verse together. Before we even get into the meaning of the words themselves, I think it is so important that we understand the moment in which Jesus said this. Because context changes everything. If you read a sentence on its own, without knowing where it came from, you can miss the weight of it entirely. So let us set the scene. It is the night before Jesus is going to be arrested. It is the night before he is going to be beaten, mocked, and nailed to a cross. This is the last evening he has with his closest friends, the 12 disciples, before everything changes forever. This is what we call the Last Supper. Jesus knows what is coming. He knows that within hours he will be betrayed by one of his own, he knows that Peter, his close friend, will deny even knowing him 3 times, and he knows that soon he will be gone from this earth. And in this most intense, most emotional, most heavy moment of his entire earthly ministry, what does Jesus choose to do? He does not give a lecture about theology. He does not warn them about the dangers ahead. Instead, he gets up from the table, he takes off his outer clothing, he wraps a towel around his waist, and he begins to wash the feet of his disciples, one by one. In that culture, foot washing was the job of the lowest servant in the house. It was considered so humiliating a task that Jewish servants could not even be forced to do it, only Gentile slaves. And here is Jesus, the Son of God, the one through whom all things were made, kneeling on the floor, washing the dusty, dirty feet of ordinary fishermen and tax collectors. This is the setting. This is the atmosphere in the room when Jesus stands back up, sits back down at the table, and speaks the words we are studying today. A new command I give you, love one another, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Do you see it now? This is not a verse that came out of nowhere. This is a command that comes directly after an act of humble, sacrificial, servant-hearted love. Jesus did not just tell them to love one another, he showed them first, and then he told them. That order matters. Love, in the way Jesus is describing, is not simply a feeling we talk about, it is something we demonstrate with our actions, often in ways that cost us something, often in ways that require us to lower ourselves. Now let us look closely at the actual wording of the verse, because every single phrase here is loaded with meaning. Jesus begins by saying, "A new command I give you." Right away that should make us pause and ask a question. New. Why does Jesus call this new? Because if you know your Old Testament, you know that the command to love your neighbor was not actually new at all. It is found all the way back in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, where God tells the Israelites, "Love your neighbor as yourself." So the disciples sitting at that table, being devout Jewish men, would have already known this commandment. They had heard it read in the synagogue their whole lives. They had memorized it as children. So why would Jesus stand up and call this a new commandment if it already existed for over 1,000 years before he arrived? This is one of the most beautiful and most overlooked details in the entire passage, and I want you to really catch this. The newness is not found in the command to love. The newness is found in the standard of that love. Jesus does not simply say love one another as you love yourself, which is what the old law said. He says, love one another as I have loved you. Do you see the shift there? The measuring stick has changed completely. Under the old standard, the bar for love was your own self-interest, your own comfort, your own natural affection for the people close to you. But under this new standard, the bar is Jesus himself. His sacrifice. His humility. His willingness to kneel down and wash the feet of the very men who would abandon him within hours. His willingness to go to a cross for people who did not deserve it and could never repay him. That is the new standard. Not merely love others as much as you love yourself, but love others as much as Christ loved you, which, if we are honest, is a far higher, far more demanding, far more supernatural kind of love than anything we could produce on our own strength. This is such an important point that I want to spend a little more time on it before we move forward, because I think a lot of people hear this verse and they reduce it down to something small, something manageable, something that simply means be nice to people, or be a good person, or treat others kindly. And yes, kindness is certainly part of it, but the love that Jesus is describing here goes so much deeper than ordinary niceness. Think about what Jesus had already done for these men by the time he spoke this sentence, and think about what he was about to do within just a few hours after speaking it. He had spent 3 years walking with them, teaching them, feeding them when they were hungry, healing the sick around them, being patient with their arguments about who was the greatest, being patient with their doubts, their fear, their slowness to understand. He had just knelt down and washed their feet, including the feet of Judas, the very man who was at that moment planning to betray him for 30 pieces of silver. Think about that for a moment. Jesus washed the feet of his betrayer. He served the man who was about to hand him over to be crucified. That is the kind of love Jesus is calling us to. Not love only for the people who treat us well, not love only for the people who are easy to love, not love only for our family and our closest friends, but love that reaches even toward the people who wrong us, who disappoint us, who hurt us, who betray our trust. And within a few short hours after saying this command, Jesus would go even further. He would be arrested unjustly, he would be spit on, he would be struck in the face, he would be mocked, he would carry a heavy wooden cross through the streets while people jeered at him, and then he would be nailed to that cross and left to die a slow and agonizing death. And while he was hanging there, in unimaginable pain, what did he say about the very people who put him there? He said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." That is the standard. As I have loved you. That is what those 4 words actually mean when you place them against the full picture of what Jesus was about to endure. So now that we understand the depth of this new standard, let us talk about why Jesus chose this particular moment, this particular night, to give this particular command. I believe it is because Jesus knew that after he was gone, his followers would face pressure, opposition, and hardship, and the thing that would hold them together, the thing that would identify them to the watching world as belonging to him, would not be their doctrine alone, not their rituals alone, not even their miracles alone, but their love for one another. In fact, if you keep reading in John chapter 13, the very next verse, verse 35, Jesus continues this thought and says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Read that again. By this. Not by how much scripture you can quote. Not by how impressive your worship service looks. Not by how many rules you follow or how correct your theology is. By this, by your love for one another, the world will know that you belong to Jesus. That is an incredibly high standard for us today, is it not? Because if we are honest, love is often the thing that is missing, even in Christian communities. We can be quick to argue over doctrine, quick to divide over preferences, quick to gossip about one another, quick to hold grudges, quick to judge each other's mistakes, and slow, so slow, to actually love one another the way Jesus described. And yet Jesus said this is the mark, this is the identifying sign, this is what will make outsiders look at the church and say, there is something different about those people, there is something about the way they treat each other that I do not see anywhere else in the world. Let us think for a moment about how radical this command truly was in its original setting, and honestly how radical it still is today. The ancient world that Jesus lived in was not a world that celebrated selfless love the way we sometimes assume. It was a world built on hierarchy, on honor and shame, on power and status. The Roman culture surrounding the Jewish people valued strength, conquest, and self-advancement. Even within Jewish society, there were divisions between rich and poor, between the religious elite and common people, between those considered clean and those considered unclean. Love, real self-sacrificing love that crossed those social boundaries, was not the norm. It was actually quite countercultural. So when Jesus commands his disciples to love one another as he loved them, he is asking them to live in direct opposition to the values of the world around them. He is asking fishermen to love tax collectors. He is asking zealots, men who hated Roman occupation and everything connected to it, to sit at the same table and love men who worked for the Roman tax system. He is asking proud men to wash each other's feet instead of arguing about who deserves the highest seat. This command was never meant to be comfortable. It was never meant to be easy. It was designed from the very beginning to stretch his followers beyond their natural inclinations and into something supernatural, something that could only be explained by the presence and power of God working within them. And I think this is exactly where the command becomes so relevant for our lives today, because honestly, human nature has not changed very much in 2,000 years. We still live in a world that tells us to look out for ourselves first. We still live in a culture that often values being right over being loving, that values winning arguments over winning hearts, that values self-protection over vulnerability and sacrifice. We are surrounded by messages that tell us to cut off people who inconvenience us, to cancel relationships the moment they become difficult, to protect our own comfort at almost any cost. And into the middle of all of that noise comes this ancient command from Jesus, still speaking just as clearly today as it did that night in the upper room. Love one another as I have loved you. Not as the culture loves. Not as your feelings dictate in the moment. Not as is convenient or comfortable. But as Christ loved you, which means sacrificially, which means humbly, which means even when it costs you something, even when the other person does not deserve it, even when your flesh wants to walk away. I want to take a moment now to talk about what this kind of love actually looks like in practice, because it is easy to talk about love in the abstract, but much harder to walk it out in the specific, ordinary moments of daily life. Love, the way Jesus modeled it, often does not look glamorous. It rarely looks like grand gestures broadcast for everyone to see. Most of the time, it looks small. It looks like patience with a spouse who is going through a hard season and is not always easy to be around. It looks like forgiving a friend who said something hurtful, even before they apologize, even if they never apologize at all. It looks like showing up for a family member during a difficult diagnosis, sitting in a hospital waiting room, bringing a meal, offering your presence even when you do not have the right words. It looks like listening to someone whose opinions you strongly disagree with, and choosing to treat them with dignity instead of contempt. It looks like serving quietly, behind the scenes, without needing credit or recognition. It looks like biting your tongue when you want to say something sharp, and choosing gentleness instead. It looks like giving grace to a coworker who dropped the ball on a project, instead of throwing them under the bus. It looks like welcoming the person who feels like an outsider, the person sitting alone, the person who does not quite fit in, and making room for them at your table, literally and figuratively. This is the kind of love Jesus is talking about. Not a love that only shows up when it is easy or convenient, but a love that shows up in the mundane, ordinary, sometimes exhausting moments of everyday life, and chooses to serve anyway, chooses to forgive anyway, chooses to stay soft anyway, even when the world would tell you that you have every right to grow bitter, or walk away, or protect yourself instead. There is something else I want you to notice about this verse, and it is easy to miss if you read too quickly. Jesus does not say, love one another if they love you back. He does not say, love one another as long as it is reciprocated. He does not attach any conditions to this command at all. It is simply, love one another, as I have loved you. And think again about how Jesus loved the disciples in that very room. Judas, who would betray him within hours, received the same washing of feet as Peter, James, and John. Peter, who would deny even knowing Jesus 3 times before the sun rose the next morning, received that same act of humble service. Jesus was not loving these men because they were guaranteed to love him back faithfully. In fact, he knew with absolute certainty that they would fail him, that they would scatter in fear, that one of them would betray him outright. And he washed their feet anyway. He loved them anyway. This tells us something incredibly important about the nature of the love we are called to. It is not a transactional love. It is not love that we dole out carefully, only to the people who have proven themselves worthy of it, only to the people who we are confident will return the favor. It is a love that gives first, that serves first, that forgives first, regardless of whether it is ever reciprocated. That is a hard teaching. I will not pretend it is easy. Loving people who will not love you back, forgiving people who have not asked for forgiveness, serving people who take you for granted, this goes against nearly every instinct we have for self-preservation. And yet this is exactly the standard that Jesus set, and exactly the standard he is calling his followers to live by. Let us also take a moment to talk about why love, above everything else, is the identifying mark Jesus chose for his followers. Because he could have chosen something else. He could have said, "They will know you are my disciples by your knowledge of Scripture." He could have said, "They will know you are mine by your church attendance, or by your ability to perform miracles, or by the size of your ministry, or by how eloquently you can defend your faith in a debate." But he did not choose any of those things. He chose love. And I believe there is a profound reason for that. Anyone can memorize facts. Anyone can attend a building on a Sunday morning. Anyone can put on a performance of religious devotion. But love, real, sacrificial, others-focused love, cannot be faked for very long. It requires something internal, something transformed, something supernatural at work in a person's heart. You cannot consistently love difficult people, forgive people who have wronged you, serve without recognition, and remain humble in the face of pride, purely through willpower or discipline alone. Eventually your own strength runs out. This kind of love requires the very love of Christ living inside of you, flowing out of you, because your own natural reserves of patience and grace are simply not deep enough to sustain it over a lifetime. This is why love becomes such a powerful witness to the world. When people see a community of believers who genuinely love one another, who forgive quickly, who serve humbly, who welcome the outsider, who stay loyal through hardship, who choose grace over grudges again and again, they are witnessing something that cannot be explained by human effort alone. They are witnessing the evidence of God's presence and power at work. That is why Jesus said, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Because that kind of love points beyond ourselves to the source of that love. I also want us to consider the word command that Jesus uses here, because I think sometimes we soften this verse in our minds and treat it more like a gentle suggestion than what it actually is. Jesus does not say, "I would really appreciate it if you tried to love one another when you feel like it." He says, "A new command I give you." Command. That is strong language. It is the language of authority, the language of instruction that carries weight and expectation. This tells us that love, in the Christian life, is not optional. It is not a bonus feature reserved only for especially spiritual people, or people who happen to have a naturally warm personality. It is a command, given directly by Jesus himself, to every single person who claims to follow him. This means that love is not something we get to opt out of when it becomes inconvenient. It is not something we set aside when someone has hurt us deeply, or frustrated us repeatedly, or disagreed with us sharply. It is a command that remains in force regardless of how we feel in the moment. Now, I understand this can feel overwhelming, especially if you are currently in a season where loving certain people feels almost impossible. Maybe there is someone in your life right now, a family member, a former friend, a coworker, someone who has hurt you so deeply that the very idea of loving them the way Jesus describes feels out of reach. I want to gently remind you that this command was never meant to be carried out in your own strength alone. The same Jesus who gave this command also promised to send his Spirit to live inside of his followers, to empower them, to produce in them the very fruit of love that this command requires. Galatians chapter 5 tells us that love is the very first fruit of the Spirit. It is not something we manufacture through sheer effort, it is something that grows in us as we abide in Christ, as we stay connected to him, as we allow him to work in our hearts over time. Let us now turn our attention to how this command applies practically in some of the most common relationships we navigate in our lives, because I think it helps to get concrete rather than staying only in the theoretical. Let us start with the family. Family relationships are often where love is tested the most, precisely because we cannot simply walk away the way we might from a casual friendship. Marriages require this kind of sacrificial love on a daily basis, choosing to serve your spouse even after a long, exhausting day, choosing patience during disagreements instead of keeping score, choosing to forgive quickly instead of holding on to resentment that quietly poisons the relationship over years. Parenting requires this love as well, showing up for your children with patience even when you are depleted, disciplining them out of love rather than frustration, modeling grace for them so that they learn what forgiveness looks like by watching you extend it. Sibling relationships, extended family gatherings, in-law relationships, these are often the exact places where old wounds and old patterns resurface, and yet this is precisely where Jesus calls us to love as he loved, choosing humility over pride, choosing reconciliation over distance, choosing to extend grace the way it was extended to us. Now let us think about friendships. True friendship, the kind Jesus describes elsewhere in this same conversation with his disciples when he says greater love has no one than this, that they lay down their life for their friends, is costly. It requires vulnerability, honesty, and loyalty, even when it is not convenient. It means showing up for a friend in crisis even when you are tired. It means telling a friend a hard truth out of love rather than staying silent to avoid discomfort. It means celebrating a friend's success without jealousy, and sitting with a friend in their sorrow without trying to rush them out of it. It means staying loyal to people even during seasons when the friendship feels one-sided, trusting that love, like the love Jesus modeled, gives without demanding equal return. Now let us think about the workplace, because so many of us spend the majority of our waking hours there, often surrounded by people we did not choose to be around. Loving one another in a professional setting might look like treating a difficult coworker with respect even when they make your job harder. It might look like giving credit where credit is due instead of taking it for yourself. It might look like being honest in your work instead of cutting corners that would hurt others. It might look like showing genuine interest in the well-being of the people you work alongside, rather than viewing them purely as means to your own professional success. And of course, let us think about the church community itself, because this is the context in which Jesus originally gave this command. Loving one another within a church family means extending grace to people who worship differently than you, who hold different opinions on secondary issues, who come from different backgrounds and life experiences. It means welcoming the newcomer who feels nervous and out of place. It means checking on the person who has not been seen in a few weeks. It means resolving conflict directly and humbly instead of allowing gossip and division to spread. It means serving behind the scenes without needing applause, and celebrating the gifts and growth of others without comparison or jealousy. If churches truly lived out this command the way Jesus intended, I believe the watching world would take notice in a powerful way, because genuine, sacrificial love within a community is still one of the rarest and most compelling things a person can witness. I want to pause here and speak directly to anyone watching who is finding this command particularly hard right now. Maybe you have tried to love someone well and it has been thrown back in your face. Maybe you have forgiven the same person over and over, and they have never once acknowledged the hurt they caused you. Maybe you are exhausted from being the one who always extends grace while never receiving it in return. I want you to know that Jesus sees that. He is not asking you to pretend the pain is not real, or to stay in situations that are abusive or unsafe, because love does not require you to accept mistreatment without boundaries. Love as Jesus modeled it was sacrificial, but it was never a doormat for abuse. He confronted wrongdoing directly. He set boundaries with religious leaders who tried to trap him. He wept over the pain of loss. Loving as Christ loved does not mean suppressing your own feelings or ignoring wisdom and discernment. It means choosing, again and again, with God's help, not to let bitterness take root, not to let hardness settle into your heart, even while you protect yourself wisely and seek healthy boundaries where they are needed. I also want to highlight something beautiful about the order of events in this passage that we touched on earlier but deserves a second look. Jesus washes the disciples' feet before he tells them to love one another. He models the behavior before he commands it. This teaches us something important about how love is meant to spread. It is not primarily taught through lectures or sermons, although those certainly have their place. It is taught through demonstration. Children learn to love by watching how their parents love. Church members learn to love by watching how their leaders love. Co-workers learn to love by watching how their colleagues treat one another under pressure. If you want to see more love in the relationships around you, in your family, in your workplace, in your community, one of the most powerful things you can do is simply begin modeling it yourself, consistently, humbly, without waiting for someone else to go first. Jesus went first. He knelt down. He served first. He loved first. And then he said, "Now go and do likewise." As we come toward the end of our time together today, I want to bring us back to the second half of the verse one more time, because I think it holds the key to actually living this out day after day. As I have loved you. The power to fulfill this command does not come from gritting our teeth and trying harder through sheer willpower. It comes from continually returning to the source of that love, remembering what Christ has done for us, remembering the depth of grace and mercy we ourselves have received. When we forget how much we have been loved and forgiven, it becomes almost impossible to extend that same love and forgiveness to others. But when we stay close to Jesus, when we remember the cross, when we remember that he loved us while we were still far from him, while we were still sinners, while we still had nothing to offer him in return, something begins to shift in our hearts. Gratitude softens us. Grace received naturally begins to overflow as grace given. This is why staying connected to Christ through prayer, through scripture, through worship, through community, is not just a religious routine, it is the actual fuel that makes this kind of supernatural love possible and sustainable over the long haul of life. So as we close today, I want to leave you with a simple but challenging question to sit with this week. Who is the person in your life right now that this command is asking you to love in a deeper, more sacrificial way? Maybe it is someone easy to picture right now as I say this. Maybe it is a spouse, a parent, a child, a friend who has drifted, a coworker who frustrates you, or someone at church who you have kept at arm's length. I want to invite you, this week, to take one small, practical step toward loving that person the way Christ has loved you. It might be a phone call. It might be an apology. It might simply be praying for them with a softened heart before you interact with them again. It might be choosing patience in a moment when you would normally react with frustration. Remember, this new command was never meant to stay theoretical. It was given to be lived out, in ordinary moments, day after day, until it becomes the defining mark of who we are. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, walking through John 13:34 together. If this verse spoke to you today, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me who came to mind as you were listening, or share how you are hoping to live this command out this week. If you found this encouraging, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, so you never miss a verse of the day. And as always, I will leave you with this thought to carry with you until we meet again. A new command I give you, love one another, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. May we, as his followers, be known above everything else, not by our arguments, not by our platforms, not by our achievements, but by our love. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.